Jim Kwik, welcome to the Lifestylist Podcast.
Luke, I've been looking forward to this. Thank you for having me.
Oh, me too. This is so cool that you were in New York City at the same time.
I love this setup here.
You know, I got to say, I had this plan hatched where I got a great hotel room. The hotel desires to remain anonymous for publicity purposes, but we're on the Lower East Side, and I got a room with an amazing terrace. And I was like, October, it'll be perfect temperature. I'll set up all my cameras and all my stuff out on the terrace. And then I got here and it was like 50 degrees and freezing wind.
Yeah.
So yeah, I set it up in my room, but it was a little awkward to kind of, hey, come in, it's a tiny ass hotel room. Like, hey, come in my bedroom and like record. It was just weird. So I found this spot and no one seemed to yell at me so far. So yeah, it's great natural lighting and relatively quiet. So here we are. So do you live sometimes in New York and LA, or are you just traveling like me?
I'm bi-coastal, so I'm in Los Angeles and New York City.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
I grew up not too far from here in Westchester.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, cool, man.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get right into the thick of it here. I've heard your story before on a number of occasions. I've listened to you on a lot of podcasts. I've seen you doing public speaking gigs and things like that. And I think I relate because things that happen in your childhood, things that were said regarding your intelligence, your brain, things you heard in school left a really negative imprint on you. And then as an adult now, you've not only managed to overcome some of those erroneous beliefs about your ability to learn and your intelligence, IQ, et cetera, but now you're actually teaching people like me that there are no limits in terms of what we're capable of. So in the interest of time, let's get just a brief snapshot for the audience of what happened when you were a kid and the messages that you got around your ability to learn and remember and things like that.
Sure, Luke. The quick of it, pun kind of intended. is,
Dude, you have a name. You can't not pun your name.
I know.
It fits with everything.
And it's really my last name. I didn't change it to do what I do. You could say my life, my destiny was pretty much planned out. I had to be a runner in school, which is a lot of pressure when your name is Kwik.
That's hilarious.
And I get to do my dharma, which is teaching people how to learn faster, and not frantic fast, but with a calm and a peace. And that's really my passion, my mission. As you mentioned, when people see me on stage live, I'll do these demonstrations. Well, I'll have like 100 people stand up and I'll memorize their names in real time, or 100 numbers or 100 random words. But I always tell people, I don't do this to impress you. I do this to express to you what's really possible. Because the truth is, every single person who's here with us could do that and so much more. We just weren't taught. If anything, I feel like we were taught a lie. The lie that somehow our intelligence, our memory, our potential is somehow fixed, like our shoe size. And, we've discovered more about the human brain more in the past 10 years, 20 years than the previous 1,000 years combined. And we found is we're grossly underestimating our own capabilities, that we could do things, remarkable things, we just weren't taught how to do that, because school really focused on teaching us what to learn, subjects like math, history, science, Spanish. But how many classes, Luke, were there on how to learn?
Absolutely zero.
Exactly. Like how to think, how to solve problems, how to be your best self, how to get healthy and, connect and develop intrapersonal intelligence and transformation. And so my quick story is that I was labeled the boy with the broken brain at the age of 9. And because at the age of 5, I had a head trauma, brain injury. I had a very bad fall. I had these learning difficulties, and I was put in special classes. How that manifested was I had poor focus, which I think a lot of people nowadays could relate to. I had a very bad memory. It took me an extra few years to learn how to read, which is very frustrating as you're a child because everyone else could do something and you feel like there's something wrong with you. I remember back in school, they would pass around that book. You would get in circles, and then everyone had to read out loud.
Worst nightmare ever.
Yeah, I actually think that's where a lot of the fear of public speaking, which I know a lot of people can relate to, public speaking, being scared of that is, I think a lot of it was imprinted when we were like, that book was coming around, because nobody was a great reader back then, and then all eyes are on you, and I think that's where that nervousness and that anxiety came from for a lot of people. But for me, I couldn't read at all. So when that book kept on coming closer and closer and closer, being passed down, when I would receive it, I would just look at it and just want to cry. I just pass it down, and I couldn't read. But at the age of, I struggled all through school. My two biggest challenges were learning and public speaking, because when you feel like you're the boy with the broken brain, you don't connect with people. You don't relate to people. You don't express yourself fully. And which is ironic, right? My two biggest challenges were learning and public speaking, but the universe has a sense of humor because that's really what I do all the time. At the age of 18, I hit a wall where I was a freshman in college. I wanted to make a fresh start and show my friends and my family, myself, that I was really okay and good enough. And I kept on studying and studying and studying, and I lived in the library, and I ended up passing out in the library. I fell down a flight of stairs. I hit my head again.
Dude.
Yeah, and I woke up in the hospital 2 days later, and at this point, I was down to, because I wasn't eating or doing anything healthy for myself, I was down to 117 pounds. I was just wasting away, and I woke up in the hospital bed, and I thought I died, and maybe part of me did or wanted to. It's just very dark, despair time, and I said there has to be a better way. And at that time, the nurse at that moment came in with a mug of tea. You'd love this. And on the mug had a picture of Albert Einstein, a pretty great thinker. But even deeper was this quote from him that you've heard, that everyone has heard. It said something like, the same level of thinking that's created your problem won't solve your problem. And it made me think a new question. And I really do believe that if we want to change our life, part of it is changing the questions we ask of ourselves and of others. And I asked a new question thinking, what's my biggest challenge? And it's like, I'm a very slow learner. And I was like, well, how do I think differently about it? And I was like, well, maybe I can learn how to learn. And that put me on a quest for really understanding how my brain worked. Because I wanted to solve this riddle about, how does my brain work so I could work my brain? How does my memory work so I could work my memory? And I started studying adult learning theory, some brain science, speed reading, old 2,000-year-old mnemonic devices back in ancient Greece, like everything I get my hands on to give me an advantage. And about 60 days into it, Luke, a light switch just flipped on. And for the first time in my whole life, I started to understand things. I started to have better focus. I started to remember things. I started to read faster, think clearer. And as my grades improved, I couldn't help but I was actually really upset, if I'm honest, thinking like, why, I was angry. It's like, why wasn't I taught this back in school? And so I started to share it with friends, and I started to tutor. And one of my very first students I was tutoring, she was a freshman. I remember it's like it's yesterday. She read 30 books in 30 days.
Wow.
Could you imagine going online and picking up 30 books and reading it in a month?
I would like to.
And
I can't imagine it, but yeah, it's
I wanted to find out not how she did it. I know how because I taught her, but I want to know why. I'm extremely interested in human motivation, like you are. Like why do some people do things that they know they should do, and other people don't, right? And I found out by going back to the power of questions, asking a question, and I found out that her motivation was her mother was dying of terminal cancer and was given 2 months to live, just 60 days to live. And the books she was reading were books to save her mom's life. Books, right up to our listeners' alley, books on health and wellness and energy, alternative medicine. And I wished her luck. I said prayers. 6 months later, I don't hear from her, but 6 months later, I get a call from this young lady, and she's crying, and she's crying and crying. I can't get a word out of her. But when she finally stops, I find out they're tears of joy, that her mother not only survived, but is really getting better. Doctors don't know how, they don't know why. They actually called it a miracle. But her mother attributed 100% to the great advice she got from her daughter that learned it from all these books. And at that moment, I realized that if knowledge is power, we've all heard that, then learning is your superpower. That if knowledge is power, learning is your superpower. And it's a superpower we all have inside of us. And, my mission in life is really showing people how to unlock that power. And my mission is, because I was the boy with the broken brain, I don't want people to suffer and struggle and not feel like they're enough. It's just because if you're overloaded right now, if you're listening to this, if you feel distracted more than ever, if you have memory loss, if you can't focus, concentrate, it's not completely your fault. It's just we weren't taught how to do those things. And my whole life is about taking nouns and turning them into verbs. Like a lot of people say they don't have, I don't have creativity, I don't have focus, I don't have a good memory, I don't have motivation, I don't have memory. Those aren't things you have, those are things you do. And by saying those are things so you don't have a memory, you do a memory. You don't have focus, you do focus. You don't have creativity, there's a process for creativity. And so I believe genius leaves clues. So my life over the past 25 plus years of teaching this full time is I just want to uncover those patterns of genius. There's always a method behind the magic. When somebody can learn a language faster, when somebody can learn a musical instrument or a dance step, or do the things that I do, like remembering names and such, or read, I read a book a day. There's always, I still do.
Oh,
like
I'm
awesome. a solid 5 books a week, because I believe leaders are readers, because I think our most valuable asset we have besides our brains is our time, because our time is the one thing we can't get back. We can always make more money, but we can't get back our time. And if somebody has decades of experience like you do, and somebody puts it in a book, and you could sit down in a day or two or a few days and read that book, you could download decades into days. And that's what I'm really excited about, is showing people the real potential, and make it extremely fun and practical.
So, as I understand the story, when it comes to that term, having a broken brain, did you not hear an adult refer to you while you were in the room? Like, oh, yeah,
it was.
It has a broken brain.
And unfortunately, it's sad, because I don't think it was done from a bad place. She was, a teacher was talking to another adult, talking about me, thinking I wasn't paying attention or maybe didn't hear, saying that's the boy with the broken brain. And, for the parents listening to this, or anybody who has a child or was once a child, adults have to be very careful with their external talk, because your external words become a child's internal words. So that became my internal talk, where when I didn't do well on a book report or a test or exam or a quiz, or not picked for the soccer team or whatever, which was all the time, I would always say, oh, it's because I have the broken brain. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that became my self-talk. And I think, we're talking about principles of accelerated learning. We talked about questions being the answer. We talked about human motivation, understanding what drives you. But the other thing is really understanding our own self-talk, because I remember I was running a marathon, and I was reading one chapter of the psychology of running a marathon, and it said this verbatim, word for word, because I'm a memory expert. It said, your brain is like a supercomputer, and your self-talk is a program it will run. So if you tell yourself you're not good at remembering names, you will not remember the name of the next person you meet, because you program your supercomputer not to.
All right, this opens up a line of questioning.
Yeah.
I asked about that belief, or that express talk that became your self-talk getting stuck, because in my own life subjectively, I have a really thorough drug history, and I started using when I was a little kid, like knee high, a little bit above knee high. And when I was a kid, they told you, oh, if you smoke marijuana, it kills your memory and it gives you brain damage and all this kind of stuff. And so even though I continued to do that, I always had this idea as I was doing these things, and then off into my 20s, and thankfully finally stopped at 26 permanently, hopefully permanently. But when I popped out of that at 26, I really had this strong belief that I had brain damage, and that I ruined my brain, and that I damaged it beyond repair. And I've caught myself a lot saying words like, oh, I have a horrible memory. Oh, I can never remember names. Oh, I'm always late. And I catch myself, and it's part of, I don't know, it's interesting, because it's like when you get to know someone, you share things about yourself, and sometimes those things you share might actually be false beliefs that you're reinforcing. So it's like I struggle sometimes with acknowledging the fact that I have trouble remembering,
right?
Because it's just the truth. Up until this point in my life, I managed to get by fine, but I forget a lot of stuff. And so I want to tell people that so they understand and kind of get used to the way I am. But I feel every time I say it, I'm actually reinforcing it. So are you saying that it would best serve us to, even though there might be on some level existing limitations in our capacity to function, that even though those are acknowledged and might actually be present, that it would serve us to not verbalize those, whether internally in our own self-talk or expressing that to others by saying, oh, I'm horrible at math.
Right.
I'm a night person. This
Right.
is something I've had to stop myself from saying because I don't want to be a night person. I would really love to wake up at like 6 a.m. every day and go to bed at 10, you know? Now, I have not been able to do that because I think inherently I do lean a bit toward that way, but every time I find myself saying, well, I'm a night person, I'm not good at math, oh, I have a horrible memory because I fried my brain with drugs. When I say it, I'm kind of thinking, Luke, you're manifesting that more. Stop saying that. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, well, that's a lot. Let's unpack that a little bit. It's not even
a question. It's a diatribe on my entire life.
No. Well, a few things. Well, first of all, some people are night owls and early birds. On my podcast, we had, you might know, Dr. Michael Bruce, who wrote a book called The Power of When, which talks about your power, your chronotype. And there are definitely biological tendencies based around your hormones and when you should do certain things, like sleep and make love and check your email and work out and eat and such like that. But in terms of your self-talk, I have a lot of people come to me on a regular basis daily saying, I have a horrible memory, I'm so forgetful. And so I would audit that and to the extent where I believe that if you fight for your limitations, you get to keep them. That if you argue for your limits, they're yours. And a lot of us, we do it for maybe out of habit because it's unconscious, or there's some kind of secondary gain to it. Like when somebody says they're so busy, a secondary gain might be getting some kind of sympathy, or a secondary gain might be them feeling important because I'm so busy. Must be important, but the problem is when people wear this badge of honor saying they're busy, because it's a lot of people say that often, then you start getting this reward for it, and you start designing your life to be busy all the time, and you wonder why you're stressed and overloaded. And so I think your words have power. I would also say that if people understood how powerful their mind really was, like right now, when we're having this conversation, anyone listening, they have literally hundreds of millions of neurons, brain cells firing off and wiring. And if people understood how powerful their minds really was, they wouldn't say or think anything they didn't want to be true. And that sounds really, and now understood that you can't have, having one negative thought is not going to ruin your life any more than having a donut is going to ruin your life. But it's the consistent, energy that you put into that. And so I would say is audit your self-talk, and stand guard to the doors of what goes into your mind, because it all plays a part. That your mind, I would say this, your mind is always eavesdropping on your self-talk. And there are little things you could do. I just had on my show Dr. Daniel Amen, who is he's written 10 New York Times best-selling books, including Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, and he calls it killing ants. Kill those ants. ANT stands for automatic negative thoughts. And something simple you could do. I mean, there's so many different ways of changing negative self-talk and beliefs. Anything from EFT, like tapping, to on different meridian points, to even adding a simple word like yet. I don't have a great memory yet, right? I'm not.
That's great.
Because it changes the feeling, because words have strength to it. Even like I did an episode on the power of gratitude, how it rewires your brain. And it's so interesting because what you appreciates. The things you appreciate in life, you get more of, right? Because it becomes self-reinforcing. But even when people say, oh, I got to pick up the kids, I got to work out, I got to journal and meditate today, even switching a word like got to get, I get to pick up the kids, I get to work out, I get to journal today. There's a totally different feeling around it. And a big part of learning is your state and how you feel. Because I believe the key to a long-term memory is information is forgettable. There's too much information, right? Think about all we learned in school and the periodic table, and we don't remember any of that because it's purely information. But information combined with emotion becomes a powerful long-term memory. And everyone could probably see this to be true, because is there a song you could hear that could take you back to when you're a teenager? Because information combined with emotion really stores that memory, right? Or as a food or fragrance, you could smell it, it could take you back to when you were a child, right? So information. So part of what I do with helping people learn faster is to be able to amp it up, because all learning is state dependent. All learning is state dependent. In fact, like most people don't, what was the primary state people felt back in school? Like what was the primary emotion?
Boredom. Frustrated.
Exactly. Like half the room is bored, the other half is frustrated. But boredom on a scale of 0 to 10 is 0. So information times emotion is long-term memory. Information, anything times 0, if boredom is 0, is 0, right? And you wonder why you don't remember things. And I feel like, one of the reasons people they are drawn to your work in the community is there's high levels of emotion. Like when we've spoken at various events together and panels and such. When people up the level of emotion, it increases their level of engagement and the level of retention. Because that's my big thing. A lot of people will go to listen to a podcast or they'll read a book, but within 2 days, this is the stats, within 48 hours, 80% of it is lost. Which is so insane, right? Within 2 days, you could lose 80% of what you learned. And that's why I think memory is important, because Socrates said learning is remembering. And people are like, well, Jim, why do I have to remember things? Because I have everything on my phone. Well, that's the big struggle there is something called digital dementia. You're going to hear this term in healthcare wildly. Basically, we've grown so dependent on our smartphones that our smartphones are making us stupid, meaning that our smartphones keep our to-dos, it does simple math, it keeps all the phone. How many phone numbers did you know growing up as a...
Oh, you knew everybody's phone.
Everybody. Now, how many...
And it's funny, I actually remember my mom's phone number. Actually, my dad's too. My mom and dad's phone number, but my mom's number's been the same since 1980 or something.
Wow.
But yeah, when I was a kid, of course,
but how many do you know, like right now?
Probably 3.
Right.
3 or maybe 4. It's funny because I just signed up for a yoga pass and I had to put an emergency contact, and I lazily didn't want to get up and grab my phone to get someone's number, and I was like, it doesn't matter who the person I put is. I just thought, whose number can I remember? And I think I remember one of my brother's numbers. So maybe that's like 3. Mom, dad, and 1 brother, maybe.
Okay. So
but it serves to support.
Exactly. And my point to drive it in is people could say, well, why do I need to remember all these phone numbers because I have a phone? I completely get it. And I don't want to memorize 500 phone numbers, but we've lost the ability to remember one. Or a conversation we have with somebody, or a PIN number, or a passcode. And I believe 2 of the most costly words in life, or even in your business, are I forgot. Think about when you forget things, like how it makes you feel, and how frustrating it is. I forgot where I put it. I forgot that conversation. I forgot what I just read. I forgot to go to that meeting. I forgot what I needed to say. I forgot that person's name. I mean, that's probably a big one for a lot of people.
We're going to talk about that.
You meet somebody, you get their name, and then the name just disappears. So I believe 2 of the most costly words are I forgot, because memory lapses, they cost us time and opportunity and credibility. And just think about it. If you forgot half of everything you knew, how productive would you be? If you forgot half the words, half of your expertise, half of the people you wouldn't be able to perform the way you perform. But if you could learn twice as much in half the time, how much more effective would you be? And how much
It's interesting what you're saying about how an emotion and a thought drive it home. And I'm thinking about, Tony Robbins events and people like that really understand, ultra NLP kind of stuff, right? Where they're, imbuing music and excitement and emotion and then trying to create an experience and a state change so that you can actually retain the information and integrate said principles into your life. How much do you think emotion plays into our ability to remember something versus just being extremely present in a moment? Case in point being, I don't have an emotion around where I left my phone or my keys, right? But I only lose them when I lose presence, when I'm not in the now. And whenever I do forget where something is or to call someone or one of those things, and I have to say those horrid words, oh, I forgot where I did this, who did this, when I was supposed to do that. It's an indication to me that I've lost my my Zen formation of the mind. It means that I just wasn't present. So if I get up here and I leave my phone and I go to the bathroom, it's just I was not here. And it's sort of like in a gentle way, I kind of smack myself and be like, hey, you left. you've been meditating for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
The reason you do it is so you can be here, So, but there's sometimes no emotion attached to it. It's just, if I'm in my body, I find that memory is better. Do you know how those kind of relate in terms of presence and emotion or lack thereof?
I do. There's I do believe the art of memory is the art of attention, the art of presence. The formula that I subscribe to is I call it MOM. Always remember MOM. MOM. So I feel like if somebody forgets something, usually one of these three things is missing, and I use the acronym MOM. So let's take remembering names, because I think that's
I wanted to get into that. So that's good.
This is perfect segue. Yeah. Most people, 95% of the people you ask say, I have trouble remembering names, right? But if there was a suitcase of $1 million cash for you or your favorite charity, for the person listening, if they just remember the name of the next stranger they meet, who's going to remember that person's name for $1 million? Everybody, right? And now, why is everyone who's listening to this right now, all of a sudden they're memory experts? It's because, if I could be your brain coach, a coach challenges you and calls you on your BS. Because as a coach, I would say it had nothing to do with your capability. It had everything to do whether or not you wanted to remember the name. So that's where emotion comes in. Because people say, I have trouble remembering names, but you incentivize them. The M stands for motivation, right? Mm-hmm. The first M. You incentivize them with something they want, and all of a sudden they remember names. Because here's the proof. I believe the expert is not always the one that's on the podcast or on the stage or writes the book. I feel like we are our own experts, like self-coaching. And I feel genius leaves clues. And so everybody listening to this, nobody remembers everyone's names, but nobody forgets everyone's names either. There's some people you tend to remember their name. And I would say genius leaves clues. There's always a method behind what looks like magic. And I would say that some people who remember people's names, there's a motivation. That person they're attracted to. That person, they could be good for their business or something. And so when you up the level of emotion, going back to emotion, that plays a big part. Now, the O in MOM stands for observation. So that is presence. That is listening. That is being there with somebody. And when it comes to remembering names, I feel like a lot of people blame their retention, and it's not their retention, it's their level of attention. Often when people go to a wedding or they go to a networking, yoga, whatever, and they're meeting somebody, a lot of people, they are not present. Like you said, they're looking over their shoulder saying, oh, who else is in this room? Who's more important? Especially, like in different circles. Or if they're not being distracted externally, they're distracting themselves internally. Like they're not listening, they're thinking about how they're going to respond, or they're waiting for their turn to talk. Right? And that's why I could appreciate our conversation, because, even though you have a set, questions and such, like we're having a dialogue here, because some people like just want to get to the next question, right? And they'll skip something. Like I notice I'll listen to podcasts and that person will open up something. Oh, that's really interesting. And then they'll just go like, so you have a new book, like, whoa, that was something juicy there, because they've lost presence. And we all, it happens to the best of us, right? Nobody is 100% present all the time. But some people shift their focus to the past, right? And I believe if you live in the past, then you're dying in the present, right? Because part of us is not really here. And some people are, to get out of pain, they're thinking about how good it used to be, right? Or they're projecting in the future, but they're not really here where they could actually do something about it. But going back to the memory, the M stands for motivation, which is just really showing you care, right? Because people remembering names, like how are you going to show somebody you're going to care for their business, their health, their future, whatever it is you have to offer them, if you don't care enough just to remember their name. So it's just caring about somebody. And then the O is observation, which is really just being present. So I think the art of memory is really the art of caring and the art of being present with somebody. So I think it's just the art of being a good human being, and training that. But the last M in MOM stands for the mechanics. And those are the things that I teach in my podcast and my online programs.
That's the part I'm missing, clearly.
Yeah. But
I'm like, caring, got it. Every single person I meet, I don't care if it's the waiter that comes up to us. I genuinely, and I'm not trying to sound like Mr. Nice Guy, but I really do care about everyone. And
your life is a reflection of that, right, in your community, because people feel that, because in a world that it's very transactional and everything, I think they're hungry for people's presence, and they're caring. And even
I'm just going to interrupt really quick. So the caring part and the observation, the presence, I feel pretty strong in, but I must be missing the mechanics, because when it comes to somebody's name, I mean, I would have to really, really, really care to make myself stop and go, okay, the guy you just met, it's Jim, Luke, it's Jim, it's Jim, it's Jim. You know what I mean? Like, it would have to be a really important business contact, or someone I want to date, or someone's family, you know, like, it would have to have a certain stigma in my mind. Right. Otherwise, I'm literally going to forget 90% of everybody's name. And it's not that I don't care, and it's not that I'm not present. There's some mechanics part that
there are. It's two things. Number one, you, like me, and a lot of people who are listening, you meet a lot of people. So part of it is just overload, right? Sure. So it's just, there's a lot of noise, so you can't possibly, you know, just like, I don't want to install limits in people that don't, you know, have them, but eventually you can't bench press a car, right? There's some kind of upward limit for everybody. And so I would say part of it is noise, because you don't need necessarily to remember all the people that you meet. But the other part of it is we're not taught, right? And so it's a skill. And what I would say is, for everybody who's listening, there's no such thing as a good or bad memory. There's a trained memory and an untrained memory.
Ooh, that's nice.
And people could own that, because it takes away the shame or the guilt, or I'm not good enough, or the regret, or something wrong with me, I'm not enough, because there's no such thing. In fact, 1/3 of your memory is predetermined by genetics and biology. That's what science is saying, 1/3. 2/3 is completely in our control. And that's our lifestyle. It's the food we eat. It's our self-talk. It's our exercise, right, which is good for the brain. It's our nutritional supplementation. It's our positive peer group. It's our clean environment. It's our sleep, right? It's our brain protection, you know, not getting head traumas like I've had. It's constantly learning, which builds your brain power. It's stress management, because chronic stress will shrink your brain and, you know, put you in fight or flight, which is good for physical, but not good for, like, we need to study for a test or give a presentation at TED or whatever, right? And so there are all these other factors that we can control. And so having the motivation there, the caring, because like Maya Angelou said, you know, people won't remember what you said. They won't remember what you did. They'll always remember how you made them feel. Going back to feeling, right? So motivation, caring, and then observation, paying attention. But then the mechanics could really help. You know, I train people like comedians how to remember jokes. I've trained so many of the TED speakers on the main stage how to remember their 18-minute talks, or actors memorizing scripts, or financial individuals be able to remember, you know, things in their portfolio, because I feel like that's a real force multiplier. Like, I think if there's one skill for everybody on this, you know, listening to this, to master in the 21st century, it's your ability to learn faster, because then you could apply that towards anything. Mandarin, martial arts, music, marketing, it doesn't matter, because you get good at that, and it makes everything else easier. Because you're one of my favorite books, I'm sure you've read it, is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by by Stephen Covey. And the 7th habit is sharpen the saw, meaning that if you have all this wood to cut, and metaphorically, we have everyone has their to-do list, a lot of things they need to do, but if you have a dull blade, like, you don't want to sweat and suffer and struggle cutting wood with a dull blade. You want to sharpen it, and then you can cut it easier. And for me, the ultimate, like, saw to cut, you know, to sharpen is to sharpen our mind, because then everything gets easier.
That's awesome. Wow. So when you meet someone, say, you know, you're at a small event and it's low key, there's maybe 10 people there or something like that. So it's manageable. What do you literally do when you meet someone to remember their name? Oh,
completely. So let's go back to the mom. So first of all,
sorry to interrupt again, but this is one of the most embarrassing lapses. It's like, if I forget to email someone back, you know, you can make up for it. You can make amends. You can let them know, or something. You know, you forget your keys, but when you meet someone
and they're right in front of you,
they're right in front of you,
and you're like,
5 minutes later, you have to be the guy that's like, I'm
sorry.
What's your name again?
And if it's not a short-term issue, it's like a long-term issue. It's like you're at Air One and somebody taps you on your shoulder and you see somebody you recognize, but for the life of you, you don't remember that person's name, right?
Or where I met them,
right? And what makes it worse is when that person has the audacity to remember your name.
Well, right? Here's the funny part of that, and please hold the part A of the question. But there's another weird thing here, and I'm sure you experience this a lot because you're pretty famous guy and, speak at these huge events and all this kind of stuff. You've been doing this for a long time. But have you noticed that as someone who's an influencer and a personality and a celebrity kind of in your own right, that there's this phenomena where everyone knows you because you're Jim Kwik, and so they know you, but you don't know them because there's 1,000 of them, but there's only one of you. So to them, they feel very closely related to you, but to you, there's like, they're all them.
It could be that. I think a lot. I think.
You know what I'm saying? It's
right.
Like I had an event last week, and there was a bunch of people there that I'd met before, and some people listened to the podcast and stuff, and they're like, Luke, hey, and I kind of would remember the face, but
right.
They remember me more because they listen to the podcast or watch YouTube videos or something.
Right.
So to them, they were just like a blip in my life, whereas I might have a more significant role in their life as someone that they listen to or watch and things.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
I do. I mean, there's, I think remembering names is important, and nobody is perfect at it. I'm not, but it's a trained skill. And no matter how popular somebody is or how many people know them, I feel like that we could do our best that we can to be able to remember other people's names. So going back to mom, motivation, to turn that into a practical brain hack, if you will, I would ask yourself, when you're meeting somebody brand new, ask yourself a simple question, because we talked about in the beginning the power of questions. Ask yourself, why do I want to remember this person's name? It's very, very simple. And it's common sense, but it's not common practice. So and come up with an answer too, like fight for it. Like maybe I want to do some business. Maybe I want to show this person respect. Maybe I want to make a new friend. Maybe I want to practice these things I learned from Jim, right? Because what I practice in private, I'm rewarded for in public, right? Maybe I'm using this opportunity to level up, right? Because if you can't come up with one reason, you won't remember. And I always tell people, reasons reap results. Reasons reap results, right? Start with why. So ask yourself, why do I want to remember this? Just like if you're studying anything, you say, why do I want to study this? Because if you don't have a reason, it's not going to work. The O in mom, observation, a tactical thing you could do is just to listen. Like I remember the second time I had the opportunity to meet President Bill Clinton. The first time was very, very brief. And the second time, though, we were at a charity event sitting next to each other at the same table, and he remembered my name. And I was blown away. But then I was like, okay, he knew who was sitting at the table. Like his assistant told him. But then he remembered our last conversation. And that was over a year before. And I was like, there's no way somebody fed him that information. So I was like, I'm the memory guy. Like, how do you do this? What technique are you using? He was like, Jim, growing up in Arkansas, my grandfather would get all the kids in the living room together and tell stories. But what was different is at the end, we would all be ready because he would quiz us to see if we were each paying attention. And I noticed when he was telling me this story, he was really like you, like very present. Often, like I posted a picture on Instagram. It was me, President Clinton, Ashton Kutcher, Ashton's twin brother, which I didn't know he had a twin brother, Forrest Whitaker, and Richard Branson. So there were a lot more important people at that table.
Damn.
Like you look at that picture and you're like, who photoshopped that Asian dude on that table? But you looked at it and then you're like, there are a lot more important people. But it's like when he's talking to me, he's like talking to me, and there's no one else that's there. And I feel like we could all. Here's the thing: everyone, regardless of everyone's political ideology, would agree that President Clinton has high level charisma, connector, great communicator, but he's got incredible memory and great presence. And I think his incredible memory and his incredible presence comes from being powerfully present. That his incredible memory and his powerful presence comes from being powerfully present with other people. And I feel like, just like you were saying, I feel like it's something we could all do. We just have to decide to do it, and then it's a muscle. Because a lot of people are building their muscles of distraction with different things, especially these, smart devices.
Oh my God.
Because I have a video, it's been seen by 35 million views just the past couple months.
A YouTube
and
video?
It's on Facebook.
Oh, okay.
And it's just talking about the challenges of this phone, because the first thing people do when they wake up, when they're most in this relaxed state of awareness, right, to be creative and to plan their vision of their day, is they touch their phone, which rewires your brain for two things. It rewires your brain to be distracted. Every like, share, comment, cat video is giving you a dopamine flood that just, along the motivation learning centers of our nervous system, that makes things addictive. But it's also not only training us to be distracted, it's training us to be reactive, meaning that if the first thing you do in this meditative, relaxed state is check your voicemail and your texts and emails, like then you're in defense automatically. Like, how are you going to plan an incredible day, much less a life, when you're just reacting to everything that's going on in the world, right? My friend Brendan Burchard, who I had on the show, he has this saying that says, your inbox is nothing but a convenient organizational system for other people's agenda for your life.
Oh my God. So
you know
true.
what I mean? And then and I'm not saying don't check email, but I'm just saying, what if you listed 3 things that would make today a win, and then you didn't check your messages until you did like one of those things? So you build some momentum towards something that's important to you. But going back to remembering names, going back to mom, motivation, find your motivation in remembering names. Like, why do I want to remember it? And then the O is observation and just being present. Silent. Like, even if you look the word listen and scramble the letters, it spells another word perfectly. It spells the word silent.
No.
Yeah, literally, if you write the word listen down or type it out and then scramble the letters, it spells the word silent perfectly. And we could all just be silent. Another habit of highly effective people, according to Stephen Covey, is not only the 7th habit, sharpen the saw. Another one is seek first to understand, then to be understood. Seek first to understand somebody, then to be understood. And that really is just listening to somebody. You know, like a lot of people want to be interesting and they talk about their skydiving and what they do with sharks or whatever it is. And I don't really think that bonds people as much as being interested, as opposed to, you know, most people want to be interesting. And I think people really, especially if you're in a business or entrepreneur or you're in sales, nothing sells like sincere interest in somebody. So I would always remember that as a foundation. Now, when people see me memorize a room full of people's names, not only do I have motivation like you do, you know, and presence with them, which is really half the battle, then there are tactical mechanics, the final M in mom, which are the mechanics that I do. So, for example, I'll do something I call be suave. Be suave, like, so next time you're at a networking event or a conference, you know, at a yoga or, you know, a wedding, when you're checking in the mirror, your tie, your makeup, your outfit, whatever, say to yourself, I'm going to be suave. So acronym, be suave. The B is believe. Okay, so get rid of the negative self-talk, because again, if you say you're not good at remembering names, doesn't matter what happens after that, it's going to be self-fulfilling, right? So just, I'm not good at names yet, right? Just be conscious of it, because the first step for transformation is just awareness, right? Self-awareness. The E, and there's a lot of things you could do to change that. Self-hypnosis, EFT, like a lot of different trainings, right? The E in Be Suave stands for exercise. And what I mean by that is not physical exercise, although people who are more physically active will do better on mental acuity, they'll have better focus, they'll have better memory. The prime principle is what's good for your heart is going to be good for your head. So what's good for your heart is exercise, good blood flow, oxygen to your brain and such. So practice. But I mean, that's what I mean by exercise, not just physical exercise, but practice, because practice makes progress, right?
You almost got me.
Yeah, I just feel like practice, people always say practice makes perfect. Yeah. And in our world, you never want to necessarily, there's a downside necessarily in calling yourself a master or perfect at something, because then we just don't grow, right? There's always another level. And I believe practice makes progress, practice makes permanent, right? And so what I mean is that remembering names is a skill, and all skill, it could be improved through practice and training. So the bad news is it takes effort. The good news, it doesn't take as much as you think. Because once you could learn how to write your name, or once you know how to drive a car, once you learn how to type, you know how to type, right? And so the same thing applies towards remembering names. Once you practice it a certain amount of time, it becomes more second nature. Now the suave, that's believe, exercise. The suave is, the S is you say the name. So you meet someone for the first time, Valerie, it's nice to meet you. And you literally repeat the name.
Damn, boom, nailed it.
You literally say the name.
There's a Valerie here present helping us on the show, you guys, who has a new podcast coming out soon. What's your podcast called? A la mode. Okay,
I love that.
Look for it.
I love that
Great
so
job
much.
on remembering Valerie's name.
So
the man knows his stuff.
You repeat the name. You say the name because going back to observation, it means you observed it, right? Especially if you don't want to go to a noisy environment, you're at an event, a summit or whatever, and you meet Ted and you say goodbye, Ed, right? You want to get corrected if you're going to get corrected in the beginning, because you might make sure you heard it right. So you say the name. The U is you use the name in the conversation. Now you use it, you don't abuse it. Valerie, it's really nice to meet you. Valerie, what are you supposed to talk about? Valerie, wow, look at all this amazing equipment. That would be an abuse, right? But you want to use it 1, 2, 3 times in the conversation intelligently. But it could be annoying if you use it too much, just like was it a Seinfeld episode? They had the close talker. Like it was that person that was talked like a couple inches from your face. Actually,
I know the type.
There was a Seinfeld episode about remembering names, because Seinfeld's all about nothing and about everyday things. Jerry was dating somebody, was intimate with her, didn't know her name. And every time she would go to the bathroom, he would try to sneak in her purse and find her driver's license. Every time Kramer or George came over, they would introduce themselves, try to get the name out, and it rhymed with a part of the female anatomy. That was the episode. If people could refer back to that.
Now I'm racking my brain for all of those.
Anyway, so the going back to the saying it, you say it and then you use it in the conversation. The A in Be Suave stands for ask. And remember, I opened with questions are the answer. I would say, what's everyone's favorite subject? It's not entrepreneurship, it's not personal growth, it's not yoga, it's themselves, right? And I think that this works really good. Asking about a person's name works really well for names that you're not familiar with, right? 80% of names you meet are pretty ubiquitous, right? Like Luke, Jim, Valerie, Michael, Chris, names you've heard before. But you meet an Afzal or Rudiger or somebody, then you can ask, what can you ask about a person's name? I don't know, how do you spell it? Where's it from? What does it mean? What's the origin? Are you named after this? I mean, there's so many questions you could ask about it. And for example, I was doing a training at the country's largest life insurance company, about 100 people in the room, and the training director's name was Nankita. And I was like, wow, that's a beautiful name. How do you spell it? Where's it from? And I said, what does it mean? And she paused. I'm like, what does it mean? And then she looked at her coworkers and it said, my name means graceful falling waters. And I was like, wow, that's beautiful. And then a lot of her coworkers and based on that, I was like, wait, stop for a second. I was like, how long have you worked here? She's like, a little over 4 years. And you know a lot of people here? She's like, yeah, I know all of them, a lot of good friends at my wedding. I was like, I talked to the audience. I was like, raise your hand if you knew that's what Nankita's name meant. And out of 100 people, how many people raised their hand? Not one person, wow. Right? And I would say, you've heard the phrase, a name is the sweetest sound to a person's ears. Right? It is literally the most important word out there for somebody. It's their identity, right? Who they are. And I would say that, really asking about a person's name can create that bond. Not only was that person a long-term client for years and years and years, but having that connection to someone's name. So ask about a person's name. Where's it from? How do you spell it? What does it mean? And it works really well because it gives you more associations. Plus, by asking these questions, it forces your observation, going back to the power of focus and presence. And then finally, the V and the E in Suave. The V stands for visualize, meaning, Luke, you mentioned this actually in passing. I bet you're much better with faces than you are with names. You see somebody and you're like, I remember your face.
Totally.
You never say the opposite. You never go to somebody, and say, hey, I remember your name, but I forgot your face.
Right.
That wouldn't make any sense. But the reason why is our visual cortex is very large, and we tend to remember more what we see than what we hear. Actually, there's a Chinese proverb that says, what I hear, I forget. What I see, I remember. What I do, I understand. What I hear, I forget. I heard the name, I forgot the name. What I see, I remember. I saw the face, I remember the face. And going back to practice, what I do, I understand, which really is my message to everyone listening to this. I really think that all the podcasts, coaching, online programs, events, none of that works if you don't work it. You know what I mean? Knowledge is not power. It's only the potential to be power is to apply it, going back to exercise and understanding. But I would say visualize. If you tend to remember what you see, because the world thinks in pictures, right? And it communicates in pictures. When you're on an airplane, when you flew out here, the airplane didn't say, fasten your seatbelt, right? What did you see? You saw a picture,
a stick figure with the seatbelt.
Exactly.
Right.
It doesn't say, no longer on an airplane does it say, no smoking. What do you see? A cigarette with a line through it. So we think and communicate through pictures. We remember pictures better than words. So if you tend to remember what you see, then try seeing what you remember. And this is using a mnemonic trick where you take someone's name and you turn it into a picture. So if you meet somebody named Matt, For a split second, imagine using their tie as a doormat. And you're like, Jim, that's so silly and childish. But who are the fastest learners? Like children, right? Children learn quickly. And part of it, honestly, is because they play. But people say, oh, I stopped playing because I grew older. No, maybe you grew older because you stopped playing. And the fastest learners play all the time, right? And so what I would say is be playful about this. Use your imagination, which really is a superpower. If a person's name is Mike, imagine you meet someone named Mike. You know, like say you're meeting 10 people, like you said, at a dinner party or whatever. Meet Mike. For a split second, when he says, hi, I'm Mike, imagine them jumping on the table and singing karaoke on a microphone. And remember, if it makes you laugh, information is forgettable, but information combined with emotion makes it more memorable. And then when you say goodbye, 2 hours later, like, oh, what was that guy doing? Oh, he's singing karaoke on the table. What's his name? Mike, right? And that's the reminder, because and then once you know, by the way, these people's names, the true memory, then the pictures disappear. So you meet this one named Mary, and imagine you meet Mary, and imagine for a split second she's carrying 2 lambs underneath her arms, like Mary had a little lamb, right? Or you meet a Bob, I use apples for bobbing with apples, right? You meet Carol, and she's singing Christmas carols or whatever, but it gives you more of an association and a picture, and that's why you're more likely to remember it, because it's like, there's something called the Baker-Baker paradox. I don't know if you've read research on this, where they'll take a focus group, and they'll have somebody walk in and say, hi, my name is Mr. Baker, and leave. And then they'll have somebody else walk in and say, hi, I am a baker, and then leave. Somebody else say, hi, I am Miss Taylor, and leave. Somebody else walk in, hi, I am a Taylor, and leave, right? And that will just repeat. Then they bring the people back, and then which one do you think the focus group remembered? The occupation or the name?
Occupation.
Across the board, right?
Wow.
Now, but it's the same. What research scientists don't understand is like same word. Taylor, Taylor, Baker, Baker. It's only the same literally word. Why would you remember the occupation so much more than the name?
Well, their occupation could have some future relevance to you.
Mm-hmm. So there's motivation or relevance. Yeah. It also gives you a story.
I need a Taylor.
Right, exactly. And there's an association there also, meaning, and there's a story there. Like someone's a baker, you can know a little bit about their life, and you could see these things, like the person dressed up like a baker and stuff. So the visual memory is very powerful. So the V in SWAV means visualize. So if you meet a John, you could picture, well, whatever you picture for John. And then
Poor John.
Finally, the E in SWAV stands for end, meaning you say their name when you say goodbye. So because if you could walk into a room of 20 strangers and leave saying goodbye to every single one of them using their name, who are they all going to remember?
Oh, damn.
They're all going to remember you.
That's player move right there.
Yeah, and that's a standout skill. Because especially in this world, because it's not just you remembering them, you want them to remember you. And because most people forget names and they fumble over names, just having that one little ability. And again, anyone can do this, no matter your age, your background, your career, your education level, your financial situation, your gender, your personal history, your IQ. It's all trainable.
That's incredible, because it seems, I guess, for those of us that haven't ever put any effort into training, that it's an IQ issue. And that's, I think, a really another one of those negative self-beliefs, right, is that, oh, wow, you have a good memory. Oh, you must be smarter than I. Meanwhile, you see people that have a horrible memory, or they just haven't been trained to use it, and they're very successful in a number of ways. So they have intelligence, And I think that we kind of equate those oftentimes because we don't know that there is even a skill set to get us there.
I think it should have been the 4th R in school. In this school system, they teach you 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. But what about remembering? What about recall? What about retention? Remember, Socrates says, learning is remembering. Because if you don't remember it, you don't know it. And the reason why it's important in today's day and age is, I think everyone would agree that their life, everyone who's listening to this, our life is a reflection of our decisions, that we've made to this point. Right? What we're going to do, where we're going to live, who we're going to be with, all that. But we can only make a good decision based on the knowledge that we have. And if you don't remember it, you don't have that knowledge. And so memory is a real force multiplier. It can magnify you in so many ways. And not only your peace of mind, but your profitability and your productivity, your performance. In
terms of outside of what we discussed about memory and just brain health in general, do you have any thoughts on neurofeedback? Do you have any experience with that in terms of helping with focus and things like that?
I do. Because of my brain injuries, I've had 3 traumatic brain injuries. I went to I went to actually Dr. Daniel Amen and got a brain scan, a SPECT scan, and I do neurofeedback regularly. I have a machine myself
cool.
as well, because, the brain is interesting because for most people it's this black box, right? Because you could see your six-pack abs and everything that people see on Instagram, but you can't see what's between your ears. And Dr. Amen has this comment saying it's interesting because a lot of those doctors, they treat the brain without looking at the brain, like a psychiatrist or something, as opposed to like a cardiologist will look at your heart, or somebody will look at different organs, but your brain, it's really not. And so I've done a lot of that. I've gone to 40 years of Zen, and I've done
nice. I went to that too. Yeah,
very much so. Yeah. And so I feel like the more, your brain is this incredible supercomputer, but it doesn't come with an owner's manual. And I feel like if you want to improve your self-esteem, for those people who don't feel like they're enough, I feel like we won because you just study your brain. It'll improve your self-esteem overnight. It is so amazing. I mean, the amount of connections that are there, the billions of neurons and dendrites and synapses. It's like the cosmos in there. And so neurofeedback is very powerful.
Have you by chance scanned your brain with Dr. Amen and then done a series of neurofeedback and then gone back? Have you seen like quantitative results visually? Oh, wow, my brain lit up in this dormant area.
I do a lot of things, right? I have like a float tank, in my home. I do the cryotherapy. Dude. I do my infrared, and I do a lot of things that I do. My meditation I do twice a day, always. And so I do a lot of things, and that's my thing with everybody is people need to find out what the combination lock is for them. Before I was talking about a good brain diet, because what you eat matters, especially for your gray matter. We did a podcast episode on my show with the top 10 brain foods, and how to just, because, they're very neuroprotective, because what you eat matters, especially for your gray matter also as well. But optimizing your sleep, that's a big one. I suffered and struggled with like sleep apnea for a long time, and that was hard because I would stop breathing 200 times or more at night.
Whoa.
And I wake up suffocating. So everybody has their own challenges.
Did you end up finding a solution to that?
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot. I did a lot in terms of personal care. I had a CPAP device, multiple dental devices, and every biohacking tool you can imagine in terms of pillows and blankets of different temperatures and blackout curtains and everything you can imagine. So everyone has their own struggles, but I think, for anyone who's struggling with something right now, I think I had a lot of post-traumatic stress, as a kid, growing up, like a lot of people have. But what people don't realize is, for anyone who's gone through a lot of difficulty, there's also post-traumatic growth. I think people should Google that, post-traumatic growth. That some people listening to this have gone through very hard experiences in their life that they would never wish upon anybody, but have come through it in a way that they look at it as a positive light experience, meaning they found something there. They found a strength, they found a mission, they found clarity, a purpose, a belief in themselves, or something positive came out of it. So I would say through struggles could lead to strength. Through challenges could lead to change. That difficult times could diminish you, or they could define you, or they could develop you. But either way, we decide. We always decide.
Something I wanted to cover in our last couple minutes here is procrastination. I've heard you share some really great stuff on that, and I know I'm not alone in the audience and host here in that oftentimes, you kind of mentioned it earlier when you said how the inbox can become our to-do list, and how about if we just set the intention, hey, I'm going to write down the 3 most needle-moving, big picture things that I can do today, and at least accomplish one of those before I go to email. I know for myself, I'll have that idea, but oftentimes you get this false satisfaction of, well, I'm getting shit done. I'm answering my emails.
Right.
I walk the dog. I'm kicking ass. And it's like, not really. I'm avoiding eating the frog, so to speak, by keeping myself busy with the minutia. So my subconscious kind of thinks I'm getting stuff done and being productive, but it's not the stuff, capital T, capital S.
Okay.
So what are some ways that we can really just dive in and get the things that are important done and not put them off because they're seemingly difficult or whatever the case may be?
I would say this: if you're listening to this right now and you struggle with either procrastination or self-sabotage, where people will take a step towards something, but then like stop or take a step back, that kind of thing. A few things. Number one, it's been my experience that the treasure you seek is hidden in the work you're avoiding. The treasure you seek is hidden in the work you're avoiding, or that you're scared of. You know what I mean?
It's so true.
You know, it's like that cave, if you will, like in Star Wars, that you get a feeling, and it makes your life harder. And so what I'm looking for in my life are focal points. I did a recent episode in a power plant, and I opened the podcast with, one day the power plant just stops. Like, you know, all the workers are freaking out and they're like, what's going on? And the operations manager doesn't know what to do after hours and calls the local technician, and it's like, you got to help me. You save my business, please. We're in a lot of trouble here. Everything's shut down. It's dead quiet. And technician's like, you're lucky, I'm around the corner. Technician shows up, and the power plant's huge. And in the power plant are all these beams. And on these beams are all these electrical boxes, right? He goes to one specific beam, the technician. He goes to one specific electrical box. He puts a big X on it with a marker. He opens up the box, and inside, as you imagine, there are bolts and wires and screws. He looks around. He finds one screw, specific screw. He turns it not a quarter of an inch, and then bam, the entire power plant turns back on. And the operations manager is like, oh my God, you saved our business. Thank you so much. He was like, what do I owe you? And the technician looked at him and was like, that would be $10,000. And the operations manager was like, what? You were here for 5 minutes. You know, all you did was turn one screw. Anybody here could have turned that same screw. He's like, give me an itemized bill. He was like, no problem. He reaches into his back pocket, notebook. He takes out a piece of paper, writes really quickly, tears it out, hands it to him. And the guy looks at the bill, and he's like, I understand. He goes to his desk. He takes out his checkbook, writes a check of $10,000, hands it to him. And you look at the bill, and it says this: turning screw, $1. Knowing what screw to turn, $9,999. And my point to everyone listening is, my message is not that you have a screw loose. That's not my message. My message for you is, in life, there are certain screws that turn everything else on. And I call it a focal point. You know, this is a forced multiplier, a lead domino, if you will, that when you hit that, other things happen. There's a ripple effect. And my life is about finding the little things that make a big difference. You know, in all my show, you know, I have a 15-minute podcast. It's all about, like, here's the one thing that could help you with learning languages or such. Now, when it comes to procrastination, what's that one thing? For me, it's a few things. But these are the screws that I feel like going to give you the Pareto's principle, like the 80-20 rule, right? The 20% that give you 80% of the rewards. I would say, number one, a framework is 3 H's. I call it H cubed: head, heart, hands. That you could vision things in your head all day, set goals and intentions with your head, but if you're not acting with your hands, procrastinating, check in with the second H again, which is your heart, going back to the power of emotion. Because we are not logical, we're biological. So think about the dopamine, the oxytocin, the serotonin, the endorphins. I mean, we're a chemical soup, and I'm saying that people don't buy logically, they buy emotionally, right? We are emotional creatures. Find that why. So we'll overcome procrastination. Number one, if you're so good at procrastinating, then procrastinate procrastination. Like, put it off, right? Put off putting it off, right? But the second thing I would say is find the reasons. Reasons reap results. So if you're not doing these things, it's because you're distracting yourself, but really feel the pain sometimes. Because here's the other thing. If you just do the easy things in your life all the time, which is procrastinating, putting things off, then life becomes hard. And everyone knows this. We all have experience. If we put something off long enough, our life gets very, very difficult long term. But if you do the easy things, life becomes hard. But isn't it interesting? The opposite is also true. If you do the hard things, life becomes easy. And I would say that be disciplined, because when we die and we're in that casket, there's no room in there for possessions. I don't invest in a lot of possessions, and I'm not judging anyone who does. But also in that box, there's not a lot of room for regret. And they say that, you know, discipline weighs ounces, regret weighs tons, right? So do the things you need to do, and life will get easier. The other thing I would say when it comes to procrastination is there's something called the Zeigarnik effect. And it's a term in psychology. There's a psychologist, she was in Europe, and she noticed that at this cafe, the wait staff would remember all the orders You have ever like a waiter or waitress like this? They remember like all the orders, drinks, and everything else like that. They would remember all the orders until they were delivered, and once they were delivered, they would forget it, right? But this, and her last name was Zeigarnik. They called the Zeigarnik effect. Is if you start something, you have an open loop. Your mind really wants to close that loop, right? So the other way of overcoming procrastination is to break it down into bite-sized pieces, because most people, it's a big monster and it's too intimidating, so they never approach it. But if you break it down and just start somewhere, anywhere, you're more likely to finish that thing. And the last thing I would say that's going to help you crush, I did this video on YouTube. I have a 10-foot Hulk in my backyard. And so if you search Jim Kwik smash procrastination, Hulk smashes. I did 5 tips on smashing procrastination. I did a podcast on it. The last thing I would give you is a framework of why you avoid doing things. Okay, so watch this. This is going to blow people's minds. All of us have a behavior we want to change. We either want to add it or subtract it. We want to stop smoking. We want to start meditating. We want to move every day, whatever, right? There's behavior. But motivation and willpower only gets you so far, right? If you have to psych yourself up to do something every single time, that's not sustainable, right? The reason why it's not is because you're ignoring the other levels. All right, so here's another level above behavior. Is this level called capability. Capability is your training or your skill set, right? So a lot of people, let's say they want to read 30 minutes a day, right? I like to get people reading at least 1 book a week. That's my thing. If you could read, most people read 2 books a year, but if you could read 52 books a year, you have an advantage like nobody has.
Do you count listening to a book in that
Sure.
recommendation?
Yeah, but
okay.
Because we have podcasts and such, I like listening them at 1.5 or 2x or faster. You could learn that fast, but nobody could read that fast. But there's so many studies that show that people who read, it's the number one brain exercise, bar none, is reading. And I can explain it another time. But so let's say you want to read 30 minutes a day. Some people do not read 30 minutes a day because they don't have the capability, because they're not good readers. It makes them tired. They lose focus when they read. They read a page in a book, get to the end, and just forget what they just read. It's so boring for them, they start counting how many more pages they have left in that chapter, right? So if they were better at it, there's something called the competence-confidence loop in psychology, because as you get more competent, you get more confident. And as you get more confident, you're more likely to do the thing, get better at it, and it becomes a positive cycle. So number one is behavior. Don't try to change behavior. Look at your training or capability. But even if you have the capability, like you know how to remember names, but you're not doing it, check the next level, right? The behavior is you want to remember names. Even if you've listened to this podcast, you know how now, and you're not doing it because you have the capabilities, check the next level, which is behavior and values. Beliefs and values. Because if you have a belief like, I have a horrible memory, then you're not going to remember names. If you have a value saying, remembering names is not that important, you're not going to do the behavior, right? And it can come off like you're procrastinating, but it's just an issue on belief or values. And then look at the highest level, the level of identity, which we've spoke about. The identity is like the 2 most powerful words in the English language are I am. Because anything that comes after that becomes your life, your destiny, right? And so the behavior is you might want to stop smoking, right? That's the behavior. Capability, maybe you're trained on self-hypnosis on how to stop smoking. Maybe you even value your health. But if your identity is, I am a smoker, not going to happen. Because you're trying to address it at the behavior level, like, oh my God, I can't stop. So that's the problem. You got to address it at the identity level. So if somebody's behavior is they procrastinate all the time, but their identity is, I am a procrastinator. You see what I'm talking about? Yeah. And then there are interventions at each of those levels. All the change work, the people you've had on your show on how to adjust this. I'll give you one last level though. Below behavior is this level of environment, right? Somebody might want to change the behavior about eating good food, but they're around people that just are snacking all the time or smoking all the time. That environment affects that, right? So like somebody could behaviorally want to remember more people and be more extroverted, remember names, but they're not in an environment that allows them to do it, it's going to affect. Now, going back full circle, I opened this conversation saying questions are the answer. The difference that makes a difference is in people's thinking, and thinking is not but the process of asking and answering questions. There are 5 primary questions you learn in school, the 5 W's, and then the H, right? What, where, why. So watch this. Identity is the highest level. That answers the question of who. Beliefs and values answers the question of why. Capabilities